Hey everyone, and welcome back for part 3 of our patch management hygiene series. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome, and just know that you can always catch episodes 1 and 2 on demand on either championsg.com or on Champion's YouTube page. And remember, as we progress, we are building off of each previous episode and getting deeper every week into patch management until we do reach that fully automated patch environment. Each episode is only 30 minutes long, and as always, we open it up at the end for questions for the audience, and we can answer as many questions as we can get to. My name is Matt Coker, and I'm a security architect with Champion Solutions Group, and with me every week is the very talented Mr. Dan Powers. So we wanted to start off this week with a question we had from the previous week in regards to pre-caching, and we wanted to answer it more in depth here. What Dan showed everyone last week is that we set this to the future, which is highlighted up there at the top, and then down at the bottom it states, start client downloads before constraints are satisfied. So this is basically a version difference. Now, all of you that own BigFix today should be at least version 9. At one point this did work slightly different, but this is how it works today. You have the capability to start client downloads before the constraints are satisfied, and yes, it will push the files all the way to the endpoints. That's what we want to show you here today. So if we notice, this action does not start until the 17th. And the reason we pre-recorded this clip was that we were worried that we didn't have enough time to actually show it live. So at this point, if I go look at my downloaded area for this custom site, so here's the one important difference. This is where it is going to store these files, not in your cache directory. It will move them there at the time of execution, but it's not doing any network activity at this point. It's just file activity. But I wanted to show you that this folder was empty. So we waited a little while on this box, a couple minutes or so, and we waited until it didn't say pending downloads, but it says constrained. And we go back and look at the site and notice we start filling up with the actual patching content. So it's showing us the data is actually there. The other part is if you cancel that action before it executes, it will delete the files in that pre-cached area. So remember, BigFix will perform a self-cleanup during this. And I hope that answered the pre-caching question with a little more clarity this week. So last week also, just to recap a little, we talked about building baselines, our different target groups, and understanding the difference in them, and also building and developing our compliancy reports. Week 1, we discussed the basics by giving an overview of the different modules inside BigFix, and we took an action on our fixlets to a few different machines. And we showed all of this live, of course. We ended last week talking about change management, and Dan had you all think about what change management is in your environment, and we went over this idea about different patch groups, whether being in group A, B, C, or D. Starting on the patch Tuesday of every month, because it's a very predictable thing and most people really understand it. And very easily, we were able to create patch groups that represent the different weeks until the next patch Tuesday took place. We gave them names such as the test systems here, Q&A, production, and sensitive systems, but you can call them, whatever's relevant to you and your ecosystem. So if we can identify which patch group your system belong in, the next part is we need to know which day. Is it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? And here I have it lit up because I'm in group B on a Friday, and obviously that would be on the 19th. Now that we have the week and the day of the month, we need to know what our start and end time is. When is our change window, right? And the last thing we need to know is, should we reboot or not? True or false? In our experience, sometimes we can reboot servers, sometimes we cannot. And you may have different ones or more or less in your environment, and that's okay. Also, if you remember from last week, we created multiple fixlets that did a reboot, a forced reboot, and also a dynamic reboot. Then we created multiple baselines using different fixlets so we could support machines that rebooted, didn't reboot, which patch window they were in, what time they were doing it, and even after that created multiple actions based on all of that to actually run our patching environment. And we've seen multiple people when doing their patching run it from typically an Excel spreadsheet that looks something like this. So we thought, why not bring this information or data inside of BigFix? And that's exactly what Dan is going to show us all today. So without further ado, Dan, please, let's see it in action.
Thank you, Matt, for that. That was beautifully said. So again, as Matt had indicated, a lot of times, again, we were building this whole web series out in short 30-minute increments, and starting out with just, hey, what is BigFix, for those that didn't know, kind of got into how do you take an action, how do I create baselines, doing reports. We moved into groups to better support our patching environment, which the groups and things do other things as well, but around patching. And then we built some custom fixlets, which we did, like Matt had indicated. We built a forced reboot, a dynamic reboot that only reboots if it needs to, basically is pending a restart, if you will, on the endpoint. And then, of course, we started building our baselines. And as we noticed, we had to create multiple fixlets to support this, and multiple baselines that, as Matt had indicated, hey, are we rebooting machines? Are we allowed to reboot? And then once we did that, we actually took multiple actions, just as I've seen people do from an Excel spreadsheet or, a CMDB, something like this. So our thought was, well, let's take this information, and if we could bring it inside of BigFix, hopefully what we can do is help manage our patching environment, make it a little more automated. So if you have anything like this today that you dictate, hey, I got patches coming up on Saturday, let's go into the Excel spreadsheet, let's filter on Saturday, figure out what machines, can I reboot or not, and create your work and your actions, what we ended up doing is try to automate it. And what we can see inside of here is what you normally see in BigFix. I got a bunch of endpoints in here, location by subnet and type. But notice we have all this data in here. Which patch group, as Matt had indicated? Hey, am I in the test systems? Am I in the QA systems? I'm in the basic production environment. That's dictating what week after Patch Tuesday is this machine in its change window. And as Matt had also indicated, we need to also understand, well, what day of the week? Once we know the week, what day of the week? And of course, we need to understand its patch begin and end time. So we have a concept of when he's in his patch week. So third week of the month after Patch Tuesday on a Saturday at 1:30 in the morning, and his patch window ends at 4:30 in the morning. And lastly, this idea of this, can we reboot the box, true or false, really is going to come down to that. Now, what Matt didn't talk about here yet was this column right here, this patch window. Okay, what this is, it's a custom fixlet that we wrote that runs on the rest of this data. It constantly runs on our endpoints that are in the patching environment as the endpoint runs, and it simply looks at this information and very quickly can compute, hey, am I in the right week? If it's no, it's going to be false. Am I on the right day? If no, it's going to be false. Am I in the time frame that I'm allowed to patch? If no, it's going to be false. The only time you're going to see it, for example, like my machine here, which is Group B, Thursday between 2 and 5 p.m., we're going to see that the patch window actually says that it's true. So that bit will flip back and forth, and we just simply have a policy that runs on that. So what does that mean to us? Well, if we go back into our custom site here, and I had one from last week, but I have this advanced patch automation. First of all, a couple of things I wanted to show you is we needed less reboot fixlets at this point. Why? And I'm going to show you a difference. They're both doing reboots. One is a forced reboot that'll reboot whether the machine is pending a restart or not. The other one dynamically asks each endpoint, do you need a reboot? And if so, you're relevant. And we just added this idea of making sure the endpoint's up for at least 5 minutes. Never want to be in a situation where I might be rebooting a box constantly before it's getting work done. But what I wanted to point out is notice that there's different applicability count here. And one of the quick reasons for that is this is a very simple thing. Pending restart, this one is my dynamic one. So first ask the endpoint, hey, do you need a reboot? And of course, then I simply added this concept here that the operating system had to be up for at least 5 minutes or more, right? So we have some stability. The last thing we did, since we have these new custom settings, which is called the patch reboot of the client, we're looking for that. If that setting doesn't exist, of course, we set it to false. In our world, if we don't know if we're supposed to reboot this machine, it's going to be a no. However, if the setting is there, we simply check to see if the setting has a value of true. And if it does, then, of course, we're going to spit back true here. So that's what flips that little bit back and forth. So he's checking to see if patch reboot is set to true here. And we're going to see the different machines where we have it actually set as true. And the same thing with the force one. The only difference in here, of course, is we're just not checking up on this line to see if it's actually pending a restart. So again, if we go back from last week when I talked about it in best practices or a rule of thumb, is I like to reboot a machine if I'm in my change window, regardless if it needs a reboot or not, before I start patching. I've just found that works out better in the long run. And again, my point there is if there is a problem as these machines reboot and we did not do any patching, I can certainly eliminate that any patch caused the machine not to come back up. So of course we do a reboot, we're in our change window, we're allowed to do it, the machine comes back up fresh, and then we start our patching. And to Matt's point from the question of last week is if we set that pre-caching checkbox on and we initiate an action and we tell it to pull down the data before it's time window or its constraints are ready, all of those files will be on the endpoint already. So our patching window really gets shorter since we're not doing a lot of networked activity. And to note just how it works internally in BigFix, it will pull those files in the download directory of the custom site. And the example we gave was the Windows patching automation site. At the time of execution, those files will move to the cache. That's when you'll see them there. It's just disk I/O. It's changing inode, so it's very quick. And then he'll start the actual patching process. So hopefully that all makes sense to you. So the next aspect here is I wanted to show us that we created a very similar baseline like we did last time. And if you remember, we had multiple different reboot type fixlets, and we then generated multiple baselines based on whether we could reboot or not. In this scenario, I simply have one baseline that I produced by running the wizard. And if we come in here, we're going to notice that we have this idea, and I'm going to bring this up a little bit so you can see it a little better, is we have our simple reboot in here. Since our reboot now is determining whether or not the endpoint has that client setting that tells us if it can reboot or not, we no longer have to have multiple fixlets and multiple baselines. This is more dynamic. It's working off what the endpoint is telling us. I tend to set the BigFix CPU as high. Again, my reasoning for this sometimes, as we all know, BigFix is by default takes about 2% of the CPU. If I'm in my change window, I just rebooted the box. He's probably not really doing production work. He's in a change window. I increase the CPU slightly for BigFix just so that I can run my patches quicker. So again, just a little thing I like to do. And again, obviously once we're done, we want to set that CPU back down to normal, so I undo it. And again, I have my patch reboot here as well. In this case, it's actually only going to reboot the box under two conditions. First of all, it is actually pending a restart. And the next scenario is that the actual client setting telling it can reboot is actually set to true. Otherwise, it is not relevant. So when we go to take action on this, and I want to show you what we have, is notice this is automatically selected. So and I'll show you how to do this in a minute if you didn't realize it, but I automatically select that the patch window, well, either does not contain false or it does contain true. Both obviously work. You could do it either way. But we can lock these settings down so that they're automatically selected when you create a new baseline, and you could even lock it like this little lock is showing us here, that as an operator, even as an admin operator, you cannot change this setting. So this is some of that automation that we add in here. Now when I execute this on my machines, I no longer really have to be concerned so much with, hey, am I picking which group? Is it the Tuesday group of machines I'm targeting? Is it the reboot Tuesday set of machines I'm targeting? I honestly can target quite a few machines here across the board and take action on this. And what will happen is most of these machines are not in their patch window. And as we can see, they will be waiting or constrained until that patch window little bit flips inside the system. So while that runs for a minute, I want to show you how we did it. We have fixlets that do this, and we have them out on a champion site. But we have to take that Excel data that I was showing you a moment ago, and we obviously have to bring this in BigFix. So while we do have this automated, and next week we're going to show you how this is actually completely automated out of a CMDB such as Servicenow, at this point I'm going to kind of do this by hand. So we have this Excel file. I can certainly save this as a comma delimited file, which is what we do. We save it as a CSV format. I already did, so I'm not going to do it again, but that's what we'd end up doing. And I can even, let me just cancel that for a minute. I can double click this as we can look at it from a text standpoint. So it's just a comma delimited file. And now what we want to do is we want to bring this information into BigFix. So how do I do it? From my site, I chose to do this at a site level. So we can click on the site, and we can click this thing called Add Files. Under here, I can click Browse. I can click my autopatching.txt. Note that it does say TXT, not CSV. I could have kept it as CSV, but I'm going to show you why I didn't. And I'm going to say Open this. And I'm going to click this little button here, Send to Clients. Now, I'm doing this via the GUI, and I'm sending this to any machine that's in this site. So once I hit Add Files button here, and it's going to tell me it's already there, but that's okay. Any machine that we add to this site, even if you install new endpoints and they get added to this site, they will automatically pull that file down, right? Just because they belong to the site. So one of the reasons that I change it to TXT versus CSV is simply that inside of BigFix, I can get a view of it. If it's a .csv file, the BigFix console just can't generate a preview of it because it thinks it's an Excel file. So our fixlet that runs through this simply checks, says, hey, if this file, autopatching.txt file exists in this site, and you either A, don't have the patching client settings set, or the timestamp is new. In this case, since I just added it, the timestamp is new. That fixlet becomes relevant, and I have it running as a policy, and it will basically, each endpoint will simply look through this file looking for his name and then set the settings appropriately afterwards. And this is a policy that happens all the time. So that's how easy we can get external data pulled into BigFix. Now, just on a note, some of you may have questions about the add files. This is something that we do all the time, but we do it with small files. You know, we don't want to add a large file into here. It just means you're constantly going to have a lot of data being moved around, and it's a little less predictable. But for small little text files like the ones we have here that are a K in size, even in a large environment, they're not very big, but I've even done this where we've implemented something like this even in an environment that's like 20, 30, 40,000 endpoints. The file does get a little bigger, and what I end up doing is zipping the file up. Since it's all text data, I literally can take a 5 meg file and make it a few K. It just means my little fixlet afterwards obviously has to extract it, right? So a little extra on the back end, but totally supportable. But again, at the end of the day, what we're going to end up with is a bunch of systems that have this information into it. And since each endpoint, if you will, has this information, it makes my life easier for multiple scenarios. I have less fixlets that I had to create to support reboot, not reboot, what's your patch window. I don't have to take as many actions. Quite honestly, places where we've done this will usually take the default action for dev and test. And then after that, they just actually send the action to all production systems once they figured out the baseline was good. And machines will only patch when they're in their patch window, and they don't really have to worry about it. And again, things like reboot or not reboot or other custom things that you may have in your environment, like we talked about last week with the pre and postscript type of things. You could add all of these things into that text file. So it makes it very easy to do. Okay, so we go back up to the action side. I had a bunch of these going, and we notice lab environment, so some of them are not talking to me. Some people are doing it, but if you notice, we're in a waiting state. we're in a waiting state because these machines are not in their change window. So it'll switch at one point to constraint. The other thing to note, which makes it kind of cool, which I know we're running out of time, Matt is pinging me, but just on a side note, we can generate some really cool reports too. So if somebody can come to you and say, hey, patch window, what are the machines going to be patched this week? Since this data is now part of BigFix, I can generate a web report or a report via the Excel connector with extreme ease by this way. So Matt is pinging me on time. What I'm going to do is come back to here because we kind of wanted to walk through a summary at this side, and then we'll get to some questions. We want to make sure we left time for that. So Matt, do you want to speak now, or would you like me to keep going?
No, please keep going.
Alrighty. So again, what we're trying to do here for those folks that got it was we're keep building up to some automation. So next week is our final fourth part of this series, this 4-part series. So what we did is we talked about BigFix. We showed how to take some action. We showed some best practices, making baselines, reboot, don't reboot, what's my change window and stuff. What we're going to do next week is introduce, Champion has what we call an eBridge, but it's an integration into Servicenow. And one of those integration points is BigFix. So what we've ended up doing there is we're trying to leverage, if you folks on the phone have Servicenow or some other CMDB, a source of truth, is automate as much of this as possible. So even to the point where you saw me manually do some of those things with the Excel file, copy the file, add it to BigFix, in other locations that don't have a CMDB, we wrote a simple script, and it's automated, right? And it even can run it out of BigFix where it checks a certain directory. It's looking to see if there's a new auto-patching file. If there is, it will automatically suck that data into the custom site in BigFix, basically doing what I just did by clicking my buttons. So that information on the endpoints is constantly kept up to date. Next week, what we're going to do, however, is show you how you could leverage something like Servicenow, where we're actually going to see all our BigFix data inside of Servicenow. Since we can also see what patches are there, we can generate baselines or have it done automatically in Servicenow, create a service request ticket. Obviously, we got to have some human interaction. That would be, obviously, for those folks that have done it, attending the CAB meeting, getting your approval. Once the approval is done, we're actually going to have Servicenow call back over eBridge to BigFix, actually create our baseline, and actually send the baseline off. So again, we're trying to remove human error out of the equation, and as that baseline runs, we'll actually have eBridge pick up some of the results from that baseline run and report it back to the Servicenow ticket. So again, we're kind of closing that loop with some automation here. So hopefully what we talked about made sense today. And I hope you tune in next week, because that's really going to be the focal point of all of this, is showing it in pure automation mode. And with that, Matt, I guess we can open it up to some questions. Actually, it looks like we got this one done early. I know I was talking quick. I thought we were running out of time more.
Yeah, that's okay. We had quite a few questions last week, and there's a couple trickling in right now. So please, if there's anything that you want to ask, be sure to put it there in the questions box. So the first one comes from Luke Barnes. Dan, it's just, how are components added to a baseline after it's created from the wizard?
It's a really good question, and this one comes up a lot. So, of course, we can add something to a baseline at any point, right? And actually, let me bring up BigFix again, just because it's easier to see it, right? So I have my baseline here. A couple ways to do it. Of course, I can literally come in here and hit edit. I can come to the components part. Actually, you know what, Luke, I'm going to answer your question in a second. I did want to point out how can you lock some of those settings. So here's my baseline. Right here at the bottom, if I click this, use custom action settings, I'm going to click this guy. And notice, for example, my run patch window that I had preset, I can lock this. I could change, hey, on failure, you know what, I don't want you to retry, lock this. So I can preset the settings, and I can also lock it, meaning no one can change it. So I did mean to do that. It just occurred to me as I walked in here, but I'm going to answer your question now. So anyway, that's how I made those pre-done settings, so no one can change them on me. But of course, your question was, hey, how do I add to something inside of this, right? So I can come and click a button inside the baseline, and basically at this point, since I have multiple groups, by the way, those groups are really just for, to me, they just read better. There's no functionality to them, but I usually do that just because I think it reads better. This is not the way I like to do it, this method right here, simply because I find it difficult. And at this point, it's going to show me, well, all the fixlet messages, all the different tasks, all the baselines, because I could put baselines in baselines. Usually you're looking for fixlets. So the next hard part is, how do I find the fixlet that I want? Well, if you know it's in a custom fixlet and you wrote it, it's fairly simple because you can just click this button. But most likely it's going to be a patch. So you can say, yes, I can come in here by site. I can come into patches for Windows. And of course, now I have 357 to search for. Of course, I can use the standard BigFix stuff. If I know, hey, it was by date and it was a recent date or something, I can use all these methods to find my fixlet. And of course, if I add a fixlet here, click OK, it adds it to that group, right? Not a big deal. So that's one way to do it. Of course, the other way to do it, let me show you real quick, is usually you may know, okay, hey, we need a particular fixlet, or the security team came back to you and said, hey, we're looking for this KB article number, and I could search for it up here, right, inside of content. Maybe I search for this one. I know it says superseded, but I'm going to do it as an example anyway. So I found it. I could right-click on this, or I could right-click on multiple of these, and I could add to existing baseline. So from this scenario, it's going to pop up all my baselines. Now, my only, obviously, issue here is if you have a lot of baselines, this list gets pretty big, and you're going to have to scroll through it and figure out which baseline you want to add it to, right? So it obviously brings up the baseline, and I open it up here, and we can see, yep, this is the guy I added it to. Now, if I wanted to be nice and keep it pretty, I would pop this down one, because that's actually the patches versus the patch reboot and stuff that I added. Now, on that note, the other thing people usually ask, that's how to add it to the baseline. Not a big deal, right? We added it to the baseline in two different fashions. The next question is, and it might be part of your question, so I'm just going to talk about it, is if I have a running baseline, notice this baseline, I had issued it a few times. These running baselines do not have my updated two fixlets I added in here, okay? The only way to do this or get it to push it out is I would need to come out here and stop this fixlet, okay, and then I would need to reissue it to the machines. Now, a lot of people ask, well, that's kind of a pain. Why do you do that? BigFix does it for a reason, and they're never going to change. And here's the reason. They had to pass some government certifications and regulations to be inside the government. And if we notice here, again, I'm running as admin, which, again, by normal circumstances, it shouldn't. I should be doing these as Dan Powers, right? It's just so it's audit tracked. But BigFix, just from the console and also from the audit logs, is showing who and where took action. So the concept here, if you think about it, is if me and Luke and James are all, admins of BigFix, I create a baseline and I push it out and I send it to a bunch of machines, and James or Luke comes in or Matt comes in and modifies my baseline and adds a bunch of stuff. It's certified by me that I kicked it off. We kind of break that audit trail. So that's why BigFix does this. A lot of people ask the question is, how do I get it just to auto-update itself? The other thing I want to point out here, and I'll show it to you real quick, go back to baselines, is since we have these components and we have that patch reboot dynamic one, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to edit this baseline. And let's just go edit something. I'm going to change this to whatever, 60, whatever it is. I made a change to this, and I recorded it. So that changed. If I go back into my baseline, notice right away it's showing me, hey, source fixlet differs from what's in here, right? So multiple things I can do. First of all, it's showing me that there's there's even a report in web reports that shows you out of sync baselines. But in this case, what I would simply do is come in here, and I could go to the source, I could view it, hey, what changed? If I didn't make the change, what's the difference? And I can also just click this button, sync with source. Boom, done. This baseline is now synced up with that changed fixlet that I've done. Also note, there's also a button at the bottom that is sync all components, so I can do it individually. If I had that other one still not synced, there would be another highlight here that says sync all, so I don't have to click them one by one by one. But that's how you can keep a baseline up to date. So hopefully I answered your question, probably a lot longer winded than you were anticipating.
That was good. And then, of course, James Shanks was just wondering, hey, he looked on the website for to find the fix
Oh,
list that
yeah.
he said we posted last week.
Yeah, so James, what we're doing there is at the end of this, we are going to repackage up some of these things, and we're going to kind of release them in a zip file. We may do them individually, but I'll probably put all the stuff and package it up a little nicer, because what I don't have today is like little readmes, like, hey, here's 10 fixlets, and by the way, what I wanted to do is create like a little Word document that said, hey, fixlet 1, this was in slide blah, blah, blah on week 1 that we talked about. Here's what it does. So we're going to put that together a little bit better as a packet, and we'll create a zip file for it with all the links to the videos and stuff. So we're just trying to make it a nice package.
Absolutely. And that's all the questions we have, Dan. We'll give it another second or two if anybody has anything else to ask. But if not, we're finishing right on time today.
All right. Well, again, I'd appreciate everybody that showed up. So we did actually finish on time. But again, hopefully that made sense. I've done this patch automation stuff with Catch, Patch Up, and other things, but I'd have to say that, being able to put all the information down on the endpoints, and again, this works server or desktop, right? If you want to do it that way. Very simple to get data out of some other environment and bring it into BigFix. And on that note, I'll say one other example that we used something like that, which was a client of ours that had tens of thousands of stores, and they needed information because I'd watched them work in BigFix, turn around to a database, look a store number up, pull up what its phone number was, who owned it, blah, all this information. We would just pull that information out in a comma delimited file every night. And again, we just had a little fixlet that would just run against the machines to add the store's phone number, who owned it, and things of that nature. So there's multiple ways to get data in and out of BigFix. I look at it as if it helps you with inside the console to click on a machine to take action, it's worth pulling that data into BigFix. Oh, we got another question.
One more question came through from Andrew Leho, and this is, today they disabled the Windows Update service after we run the patch baseline. Is that standard practice?
It is. A lot of people will do that. Also note, and this is just a Microsoft thing, there's some patches, and I was going to jump back in the console and try to find one, but it would be hard to. There's some patches that will tell you, listen, Windows Update Service needs to be running for this patch to go in place. So a couple of things that we can do there, and let me see if I can find one real quick here. I'm just going to do a filter, create custom filter, update service, whatever, who cares what I call this. We'll look at all filters, and I'm going to look at the description. Where the heck is it? I can't find it here. It's usually in the description side of it. I was going to make a in the action statement. Let's just see if I can find that update. This will probably not do exactly the filter I want. Let's see if it finds anything though in my environment, because my environment's slow, of course. But again, be careful. My point is there's some patches that will tell you, hey, they'll say it in the description field, and they'll say, listen, I need the Windows Update Service to be running for this to work, right? It's usually a note written in red here. So what we can do is just what you did, is maybe at the top of the baseline, we turn Windows Update Service on, we run through our patches, and then we turn them off. I've also done it even on individual fixlets that I knew needed the Windows Update Service on it. Now, as they come out from IBM, by default, part of their action statement will check to see if Windows Update Service is running or if it's in a disabled state. And if it is, it'll throw an error. It doesn't restart it on you because, it's maybe things you don't want to. But yes, as far as practice, we do see people turn it on and off inside of baselines. I was trying to find one that would have a note here that said Windows Update had to be on. But again, usually we'll find it in the description field. Also note, there is a fixlet, hey, is the Windows Update or installer service disabled? That is a default fixlet, so you can even see which machines in your environment have it disabled. I currently don't have any in my small little lab environment, but again, to your question, a lot of people do that. Excellent.
I think that's pretty much it. We have a few James shared a couple fixes that he needs on here we can share with you, Dan. But other than that, I think that answers everything.
All right. Well, again, from me and Matt, I appreciate you being here. Again, hopefully you'll come next week. We do have a question to think about. We're going to throw up there for next week is, did the smaller 30-minute webinars work for everybody, or would you rather just see a long one? Our issue here was we knew we couldn't get everything we wanted to talk about in a single hour, so we chose to do 4 30-minute ones. I've enjoyed doing the shorter ones. I think it gives people some time to think about stuff, and if they have the time, come back next week and further the discussion. So I kind of like it that way, but I also realize doing 4 in a row obviously is a commitment. So if folks would think about that, we're probably going to put that as a polling question next week.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we have them recorded too, so if you ever need to refer back to something, they're always on demand. So
thank you, everybody.